Hi everyone, thank you for joining me in this webinar. Today we're going to be looking at alerting. Just like with the previous webinar that I did last quarter, this is being recorded, so if there's anyone who's been unable to attend this from your team or your company that you want to see it, you'll be able to view it on the YouTube channel later on. Now, I wanted to do this as a webinar this time because essentially I've been on a few calls now where people have said, hey, can you take a look at our alerting system? We know it's not the most efficient. To see what we can do to help. And I've noticed the same thing coming up once or twice. So I thought I would put together this webinar and show everyone at once, how best to utilize LogicMonitor's alerting system, at least in the best practices way, to get the most out of it, make sure you're not duplicating alerts, make sure you're getting all the alerts you should be. So today we are going to be focusing on the alert routing side of things. We're going to take a bit of a look at sort of alert tuning very briefly, but mostly it's going to focus on the routing via escalation chains and alert rules, and then also through integrations. So to start with, we're going to just take a look at a general strategy overview. What I think you should be thinking of when you're building out your alert routing, your escalation chains, your alert rules, how best to plan for that stage. And that's going to come down to a lot of things like sort of naming conventions and stuff. We'll take a look at that. We'll take a look at some common mistakes. Now, I don't mean obviously that you turn it wrong. It's just completely, these are things that I've seen come up that could cause some issues and you should be aware of. And I'll show you some examples of that. Then we're actually going to go into the platform. I'm going to use the example I've been building out to show you how to build up, or how to think about building up your alert routing. I'm actually going to take a go at building out some of those alert rules. And then when I say beyond the platform, that's really talking about those integrations. So we're going to take a look at just a simple HipChat integration. HipChat, if you're unaware, is sort of an internal messaging tool, very much like Slack and other things like that. So we're going to take a look at building out an integration to send messages from our alerts into that sort of tool there. And then at the end, we will have some time for some Q&A. May have to take most of it offline, but do use the questions option in the GoToWebinar portal there so that we can come to those at the end. Okay, so a general overview. First of all, actually, is that alert tuning, as I mentioned. And so this is the sort of idea which you're looking at. Again, this is being recorded, so you can come back and pause it, take a closer look at this. But really, there's sort of 4 questions you want to be asking yourself at the top level as you go through when an alert comes in. And the first is, do you understand what the alert means? If not, do take a look at the data point definition, because there'll be information of, is it reporting the host status, the connection time in seconds or milliseconds or whatever it may be, and some description as to what might indicate an issue there. After that, you want to see, what was it triggered by a threshold being breached or by a lack of data from that data point? And then if it's a lack of data, do you expect data to be coming in? Do you want to perhaps just stop that data source applying, or do you want to take a look at maybe, working out why there's no data with our support team there? Now, if it's a threshold, it doesn't matter if it happened. If not, you might want to change the tuning, or again, stop that data point or data source applying to that device or even that group. And finally, is it actionable? Is it something you would want to take action on, or is it something you just want to know about that could become an issue? If it's the latter, that's when we'd say use our warning alerts. That's really what they're there for. If it's the earlier, it does matter and it's something you can take action off the back of, that's when we'd use error or critical. And that's really sort of our guideline for alert tuning there. And that's what I'm saying here. Firstly, do you know what it means? Is it from no data? Is it meaningful? Is it actionable? Next, we're looking at device grouping, and I'm going to recommend these sort of ways here. So either first by location or customer if you're an MSP, and then by device type, or the other way around. That works as well if you'd rather. Really, it's what makes sense for your organizational responsibilities. And most organizations I come across would fit into one of those ways around. Might be slightly different for you, but just bear that in mind. Try and group your devices according to your organizational responsibilities. And then finally, we're going to chains and rules as sort of strategy. Again, a naming convention. This applies to devices as well, and I'll show you an example of a naming convention for devices and how it can help. But really, the naming convention here for the chains and rules, generally we recommend a chain. The escalation chain should be named for who it's going to, either the individual or, in most cases, the team. And the rule should be what is alerting, whether it's a device or whether it's just the interfaces on these switches, that sort of thing. Next is the duplication, both of rules and of chains. I'm actually not going to go into too much detail about here. The next few slides have some more detail on that, so we'll see that there. And finally, these priorities. Now, I personally think priority is a bit of a misleading name. Try to think of these in your alert rules more of as a sort of processing order, where you've got the most specific rules at the top rather than the most critical. So the ones where they need to be routed, an individual port or an individual device gets routed to an individual person, that should be closer to the top of your priority list, whereas the more catch-all general rules should be closer to the bottom. So just bear that in mind when you're thinking of your rules there. So here's a few things I've seen going through a few of these cases. The first is these escalation chains. Now, I did see one example where whenever they built out a site or a customer environment, you would have this sort of same thing here, and you would be saying, all the alerts from that site or that customer go to user 1, then user 2, and then the help desk. But in some cases, I've seen it where in each case, they're exactly the same. And this is going to cause a few issues. First of all, it's going to get very cluttered very quickly, because of each site or each customer in particular, you're having another escalation chain. You're going to end up with loads, because then on top of that, you need to have your specific escalation chains for your internal devices, for specific devices. And really, these could all be combined into one. And if you do combine them into one and say anything from a custom group or a root level group goes to this, unless we specify otherwise, it means that you're going to be able to route those alerts right from the offset as soon as you set up that environment within LogicMonitor. You don't have to create a new chain. There's not the risk of you forgetting to. And on top of that, it's going to keep those numbers of chains down. So try not to duplicate in that respect. Even though they are dealing with different alerts from different places, they could be routed to through the same chain. And then a few things we do see on the rules, and again, it mostly comes down to those priorities. So here we've got this is what I mentioned earlier, these sort of catch-all rules right at the beginning, and because these deal with all warning, all error, all critical alerts, nothing's going to get past them, so they're not actually going to get routed to these alerts lower down, which you'd want them to. Second is we've got these two rules here, network error, network criticals, and they're being priorities. Their priorities are 249, 250. Now, that's fine, but if you had rules beneath that and you wanted to put a specific network critical rule that's going to take them from interface bandwidth usage, for example, you've got no space to slot it in between those two. So always try and leave a gap, especially because if you have a lot of rules, one after the other, you're going to start seeing that you're going to need to move, individually go in and move the rules, the priorities of several rules before you can slot that in. So leaving that gap is always useful. And then this overlap. Now, try basically best practice is to never have overlapping priorities. Two rules of the same priority, really, because in some cases it's fine because the devices wouldn't necessarily, devices would be specified so that they'd go different rules. But here, for example, you've got network criticals and site A criticals, and that's going to pick up any criticals from any networking device, and this is all the criticals from site A. Now, that's an issue because there's going to be some overlap, and those rules are only going to go to one. Those alerts, rather, are only going to go to one of these rules, and it could be the wrong one. So it's always best practice to avoid putting overlap, just in case they do have some rule overlap, some alert overlap as well. Just try to get into the habit of not having any priorities of the same. Okay, that's pretty much everything from a sort of an abstracted point of view. Let's take a look actually in this environment and see what we can do to build out these rules and so on. Now, I wanted to show you this as a sort of an example of these naming conventions I've been talking about. And I think it's really useful to have a naming convention for your devices as well. So, first of all, grouping, you can see I've got the sites or the locations in here. In this case, we've got customers, so 3 different customers, and then over here we've got 2 internal sites. If you are an MSP, I would recommend having 2 sort of root level groups, the internal devices and the customer groups there, so you can have the customer subgroups beneath it. But beyond that, then I put location and device type. And then even beyond that, I've got the naming convention for the devices. So I've put an acronym for the location or customer, then the device type, and then an identifier, so which one of those devices it is. So this is, the Acme Corporation, it's a firewall, and it's the first one. And that identifier, either, a number or a name, or an indication of what the device is doing. So here we've got these servers running Active Directory, Exchange, and IIS. And that's going to be useful in 2 respects, and we'll see both of those throughout the webinar. But what it's going to allow me to do is, first of all, it's going to give me more flexibility when it comes to generating these rules to pull in just the servers or just those from, this site. And then it's also going to allow me to see it in the message that's sent out from the alert, because I won't have to look at, looking at which group it's in. I can see from the host name alone what the location is, what the device type is, and which one of those devices they are. Okay, so that's on that front. Let's then take a look at building out these rules. So just a quick note, I've got my users built out already. I've got some recipient groups, so I've got my networking, my server, and my storage groups. And I've got these escalation chains built out. And when it comes to escalation chains, really there's one piece of advice that I would really recommend here, and that's to, when you're building out multiple stages, make sure that the earlier stages have as few people in them as possible. That's just going to mean that you're giving the early people there, Dennis in this case, a chance to respond to that alert before it gets sent out to everyone in the support team or everyone at the help desk or whatever it may be, so that you don't spam everyone with emails. So early stages should be as few people as possible before you then start implementing more people there. Okay, let's do some example rules. So we're going to start off, we're a small company, we don't have many devices, and we have one guy who's going to deal with all of our alerts. So that's just going to be Dennis. He's going to deal with everything there. Priority 1, because we're inexperienced, we don't really necessarily need any others, we think. And that's going to pick all alerts, all groups, all data sources, everything. Brilliant. We'll leave it at a 30-minute escalation interval just for now. So that's going to go to Dennis. There we go. Save. Brilliant. Now we grow and we start to pick up more devices, and we think we want, let's have a dedicated storage team and a dedicated server team, and let's route the alerts to them. And we're a bit more knowledgeable now. So this is going to be the storage team. And we're going to set the priority to 300. Now, I just want to emphasize here that it really doesn't matter the actual numbers you pick as long as they're in the right order. There's no limit on the priority number you can go to. You can have it in tens of thousands, millions, whatever. So just pick a big number when you're starting this out, because then you'll have all of that space above and below it to play around with. Again, all alerts. And now I've got 2 options here. I can either go group, and I could put star storage. This is the storage team. Storage star, and that's going to pick up any group with the word storage in it. Or I could leave that as all groups, and because of my naming convention again, I can put star sto star, because that's going to be what I name all of my devices that are storage. They're going to have sto in their name. So let's go with that, and let's put all instances there. So all alerts from any storage device then go to the storage team. Okay. And then let's add in another one for the server team here. So server team, and that's going to be priority 250. Again, doesn't really matter as long as they're in the right order. All groups, and exactly the same, I'm just going to put star svr star, and all instances there. So that's going to go to my server team. Right, so I've got my server team, server alerts routed to my server team, and my storage alerts routed to my storage team. Let's take a look at that then. So servers, go into this one. Let's pick any alert here, ping, for example. And we can check here the alert routing, and we can see, is going to Dennis. What's happened there? Well, we never actually got around to changing this priority 1 alert rule that we started off with. So you see how important these priorities are. Let's change that now. That's going to be at the end, so 500. And let's give Dennis a bit of help because he doesn't want to be all by himself. Let's give him that support network, that support team there. So that then goes to him and then his colleagues as well as him by other methods, SMS and voice calls if he doesn't respond. Okay, let's take another look then. How's that fixed? Let's close that off, take another look. And now we can see indeed it's going to that service group, which is what we wanted there. Now you can get quite specific on these and you can route them around however you wanted. So our server team's good, but for some reason they only really know server stuff and they don't know anything about storage, including disks on their servers, because they're like that. So let's actually route those disk alerts from the servers back to the storage team. So this is going to be server disk alerts. So let's go priority. Well, it needs to be lower than that priority 250, so let's go 225 and all levels. There we go. So let's select instance there, but we want to set the data source to be now. I know that it's file system capacity. Same as in my previous webinar, I recommend keeping a devices tab open so that you can go in and see what the actual data source name is. And just like with everything else, you can implement glob terminology here. So I'm going to put file system capacity and star to pick up that other one there, large. Now, if you're dealing with different types of devices, for instance, Windows, it might have a different data source name for the same sort of thing, such as volume capacity on a Windows device. For that purpose, you can do pipe separation. So I could put a pipe and then whatever other data source I want to bring in. Okay, so let's route them then back to the storage team. Now I've just realized I've actually broken my naming convention, so I should change that. This server team is not, rules should be named after what's alerting. So this is server alerts. And this is storage alerts. The convention just makes it easier for everyone who comes in then to realize what's going on. And this shouldn't be called Dennis, this should be called all alerts. There we go. That's better. Okay then, so that's all fine. Now the other piece of sort of best practice we'd recommend is if you've got a site or a customer where they deal with all of their own alerts, they don't need any outside help from your central team, give them a band of priorities below your catch-alls. So say 50 to 100 can be all site A alerts. So we're going to start at just 50. And we're just going to put the one rule in there. So that's all of them there. We're going to go group is going to be site A. There we go. And that's going to go, well, Dennis is based on site A, so he can deal with those. Okay. Now, one thing we'd say here is we wouldn't actually recommend routing out any warning alerts. They, as I said near at the beginning, are more informational. We would really recommend putting those into a weekly or maybe even monthly, depending on how many you get and how urgent, how often you want to review them, a sort of weekly or monthly report there. So we don't want them to be routed out, but at the moment, all of these are selecting all alerts. If we wanted to change that, we'd have to go into them here, select error, and build out another rule for critical. So instead, let's use these priorities to our advantage. Let's say warning alerts. Let's say priority 25. We'll select warn, and again, everything. And we'll actually send this to no escalation. So we're going to get rid of all of our warning alerts that aren't, so that they don't get routed out. They'll get caught up by this rule, and they won't make their way down to other rules. And because it's 25, we still have that space above it to route any other alerts that we do want. So, if it's an interface status flap, that's going to be a warning alert, but we might want to know about it in some cases, so we can route it above there. Okay, that's everything on the alerting side there from the rules, internal rules. Let's take a look at the HipChat integration I mentioned earlier. So we're going to be using, as I say, a HipChat integration. If you're unaware, HipChat is very much like Slack. It's an internal messaging tool that we use here at LogicMonitor. And we're going to set up an integration to send alerts straight into a HipChat room. So all we're going to do is go into Add here in the integration section of our settings tab. And because it's not one of the pre-built integrations here, we're just going to do a custom HTTP delivery. So this is our HipChat room integration. Now we can use the same URL for new message alerts, new alert messages, acknowledged alert messages, cleared or escalated or de-escalated messages, or we can separate them into different URLs. I'm just going to do new alert messages. I'm not going to bother with any of those at the moment. And then everything else in here comes from HipChat's own documentation. Initially, we've built out our own documentation for creating integration here, but if you're using a different tool, it may well need different setups. That's all from your tool's documentation. So this is going to be an HTTP post. It's going to use HTTPS, and then the URL we want looks like this. So that's got our subdomain for the HipChat URL. Then we're using these tokens. So we're using a HipChat room ID token and a HipChat API pass token, which we've actually set ourselves. So they're custom properties. So when we've set this at a root level here, as you can see, there's the tokens with their values. And when an alert comes in on a device, it's going to grab that. But the reason we're setting this as a token rather than actual values in the integration is because if I wanted to, I could set different tokens on different groups or different devices, so that different alerts from different devices or different groups of devices could go into different rooms in HipChat. And by doing this as a token here, it means we only need to build out one integration, and then each device will send their alerts to the relevant room based on the credentials or properties values that they've inherited. Okay, so it's going to be raw data in JSON format. And again, we've got a recommended message format here. So we're going to just copy and paste that into it. And what we're going to see is these tokens here. Now, there's nothing in here about the group or whatever it is, but this it's coming from just the device itself, just the host. And this is why when you're alerting, I recommend a good naming convention for your devices. So here we can have the location it's coming from, or the site it's coming from, the type of device, and then an identifier for that device. And that way in the message, we don't need to have lots of tokens, but we can still see where exactly the device is coming from, the alert's coming from, rather. Only other thing to mention here is this checkbox at the bottom. Now, we won't use this for this integration, purely because this is just for a messaging system. But if it's a ticketing system, what you can do is select that, and then the initial alert message can go to a particular URL, the ticketing system, say Jira, and then any subsequent message from that alert can then go to that same URL with something appended to the end, which would be the ticket ID. So subsequent messages from the same alert can update that ticket rather than generating new tickets. Okay, so as I say, we're not going to use that for this. Save that. We then need to create an escalation chain for it. So let's add in a new chain, and this is going to be our HipChat chain. And it's going to just have one stage. Now we need to add a new user, so that's going to be me, but it doesn't matter because that's just a placeholder. The contact method, then we're going to choose that HipChat integration instead of the email, SMS, or automated voice call. So let's save that. There's our escalation chain. Then let's create an alert rule for that chain. So this is our HipChat alerts. Now priority 1, just because I want to, just for the purposes of demonstration, select all and all for A. So all the alerts can go there. Now the issue in the webinar was that I accidentally selected no escalation here instead of HipChat, entirely a user error. So that's now working there. The room it's going to go to is here. So you can see it's got some test alerts here. So the last one was on June 29th, which is today as well, at 10:56. The time is now 11:08. So we're expecting something from that time onwards when we send our alert. So let's go into our devices and go on to the alert routing for this message here. You can see it's going to HipChat alerts, which is going to go to stage 1 HipChat there. So let's send that test alert. Test alert has been sent. And there it is at 11:08 a.m. on June 23rd. So there it is working, and that's corrected that webinar mistake there. Now, as I say, a lot of the information for this came from HipChat, so maybe something different for your system. If you have any questions from LogicMonitor's point of view, or maybe a bit of a hand building that out, do get in touch. either through your support or your customer success manager or representative, or indeed just drop us a message here with the email provided, and I can build out another video or get in touch there. Otherwise, I hope this has been useful, and I look forward to making the next one for you.